Hi everybody. Today we're going to go ahead and get started with a 2D game. We're going to do a modification of Pong. I'm going to call this Pong Demo. So I chose a 2D game, made this Pong Demo, and I'm going to create it in that default location that I'm currently working in. And that'll take just a few seconds to get going, and we'll go ahead and launch it. So for this game, I'm going to go ahead and shrink that size up a little bit so that I can see both things and bring that importing piece over to this screen. For this game, we're going to be, we'll have a paddle, a rectangle that we can move up and down. There will be walls on each side and a ball that bounces around. And if it gets past us, we want to lose a life. And if it hits the other wall, we want to gain points. And we'll go ahead and bring this on over here as well. Now we're in our 2D game. And what we want to do is start by building out our... we'll start with maybe a floor and the ball, and that'll get us started. So I'm going to hit the plus sign here. 2D object sprites are what we're going to be working in. And we're going to drop a circle in here as our ball. And we can just change that thing's color directly. So I'm going to go with maybe a bright blue piece there. We'll go a little bit up a little bit, maybe. Yeah, that might do. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename that to the ball. And I'm going to add a component on that one, and we don't want to add a line to it. We want to add physics 2D, and I'm going to give it a rigid body. Scroll down here until I find rigid body 2D, and you'll see that it becomes a dynamic body. A kinematic is one that only really gets moved by player controls or by your program, and static ones are ones that really are not designed to move. It's got a mass of 1 and a gravity of 1 and an angular drag of 0.05. And if I play this game now, the ball falls into nothingness. I'm going to have to mess around with that camera. I don't really like the blue background for this. I'm going to go to black background, make that stand out a little bit. We'll press play again. And there it goes. Pretty good. All right, so now we want a floor to put things on. So I'm going to go to 2D object, sprites, and a square. And I'm going to call this the floor. I'm going to move it, use my move tool to bring it down. I want it visible, but not very visible. And I'm going to scale it out just like that until it fills my screen. Let's check my game. It's currently at free aspect. I think I'm going to go with full HD, and that will bring me back on here so it's consistent. I don't want a strangely shaped screen to mess up the thing. Let's make that kind of maybe a brownish color. I kind of like that. That works for me a little bit. And then I'm just going to duplicate that to make a ceiling. And I'll use that move tool to bring the ceiling up to there. And I'll rename it to ceiling. 2 slow clicks lets me rename. I can also do that over here under inspector. The next thing that I want to add is this wall over here. I could have saved myself some time by taking care of the colliders for these first. So let's add the floor, add 2D physics, physics 2D, and we'll add a box collider to this. And we'll see what happens when we play on that. Boop. Nothing, because my ball doesn't have a collider. Add component on the ball, physics 2D, and we're going to do a circle collider for this one. We'll see if that helps us out. It does, and it just lands. That's really not good enough. So now I want to come into here. I'm going to create a folder for my physics materials. No, I'll just call it materials. And I'm going to create under 2D now the physics material 2D. I'm going to call that ball material. And I want my friction to be at 0. I don't want this thing to slow down because of those other pieces. And I do want my bounciness to be at 1 for now. But I haven't put it on the ball yet. So I'm going to drag that to the ball. And you'll see that where that pops up is in the collider. Gets that ball material. There we go. And what you'll find is that with a full 1, it might, in a 2D game, bounce a little higher than it would be. And in fact, in 2D, I can take that bounciness and go up a ways. And we'll see that it will go higher, significantly higher than that. That can be dangerous because if it starts getting too fast, as it will when I add a box collider to this, to the ceiling, what'll happen when it gets going too fast, then in between frames, it's going to pass all the way through. You see it disappeared there? It passed all the way through the collider from one side to the other within the span of a single frame. And that meant that the collider didn't register and it just kept on going. So if I look at that ball now, it is now it's coming back down. So we might see it again, but it might bounce all the way through again. There we go, and all the way to negatives. So, and we'll never get it back. So it's important that we keep our bounciness at or below 1. So I'm going to go back to that ball material. I'm going to put it at 1. And then we're going to go ahead and create our wall. So that's going to be a new rectangle, new square. I'm not sure why they call it a square and not a rectangle. Since I can then scale it out of squareness. There we go. So I've got my corners covered. I'm going to add a box collider to that, and I'm going to give it maybe a golden color. Pretty good. All right, good. Right now that's not going to do anything, but it will later. I've got a collider for it. I know what's there. I've got a ball. Let's go ahead and add a player. So that's going to be the wall, and let's add a player. 2D object, sprites. This is going to be another square. I'm going to call it the player. I'm going to scale it up a ways and in a ways. Let's narrow that up a little bit. And then I want to move it back here in front of this. And we'll make, maybe we'll just go with a nice shiny black for that for now. Let's see how we're doing now. Oh, black's not going to work in a in a black world. There we go. Maybe we'll just go white. We'll go exact opposites for now. There we go. That looks pretty good. And then we want to be able to control this. This is where our first bit of scripting is going to come in. We've gone a long ways without scripting a thing, but we want on our player to have a script. So I'm going to add a new script. I'm going to call it player script, and I'm going to create an add. There it is. And then what I want to do in my player script, there we go. Now it's going to open up for us. And I'm going to bring that over here so we can see what's going on. We're going to use fixed update to move our, maybe we're okay in update. Okay. If we're going to look for some input work, right? And we'll just do this ourselves for now. We'll use maybe the up and down arrows. Input.getKey key code dot up arrow. And if you want to know what those key codes are, you can always just look up Unity input key codes, and you'll find a good reference for that. What do we want to do? We want to change our positioning for our object, right? So we're going to translate the transform for this. Sorry about that. There we go. We're going to say transform.translate, and we're going to use this vector2. So a vector2 is an object with two coordinates, x and y, two values, x and y, that are both floats. But there are also helpful tools in vector2, like vector2.up, which is the same as saying that the x is 0 and the y is 1 to point it straight up. Times, so we want to do vector2.up times time.delta time, and then we want some kind of speed. So time.delta time is the amount of time since the last frame. So if vector2.up is 1 straight up, then we multiply it by time.delta time to smooth it out across our frames. But that might be a 20th of a second, it might be a 60th of a second. So if we multiply 1 by a 60th, we're not going up very much at all. So then we're going to want to have a speed variable. We're going to put that up here. Float speed equals, we'll put it at 8f for now and see how that does. That gets us a good part of the way, and we can then specify what world space we're in for this. So that's here, whether it's space dot world or space dot self. So we're going to use the world space for this. We always want to go straight up, whatever the rotation of our object is. We put semicolon at the end, and let's test that out and see what we get. We press play. We're using the up arrow, and we go up. Down arrow doesn't do anything yet, but that's pretty simple. We'll just borrow this, take advantage of our copy and paste work, and we're going to change this to the down arrow, and we'll say vector2 dot, I can't remember if we do negative vector2 dot up or vector2 dot down. Let's try vector2 dot down and see what it does. Yeah, so we've got a down arrow, and we could put an else if. That way, if we're pressing both, get key is always checking. So if you're holding it down, it counts. If we're pressing both, it's going to default to going up instead of fighting itself, right? If we pressed both and it's listening for both, it's going to go up a little bit and then down a little bit. And that's something that feels prone to error, even though it would probably resolve itself just fine. So we press play, we go up arrow, we go down arrow, and we have some control over our paddle. That's pretty good, but it's not very useful with a ball that is just going up and down. And so what we might want to do is take gravity off of that ball and give it some initial velocity. So the gravity scale in the rigid body 2D for the ball is right now at 1. If we make it 0, then what it'll do is it's not going to do anything right now because it's got no force. Right? Gravity was its only force. And that bounciness at the other end kept it going. What we want to do is give it some initial force. That's going to be on the ball, so we need a new script. Add a new script. We're going to call this the ball script. And if we open that up, right? So then on start, we'll do this to begin. And what we're going to do is we're going to add force to the velocity. But in order to do that, we need the rigid body object. So That's a rigid body 2D object, so we need a variable for it. Rigid body 2D RB is what I'm going to call it. And then in start, we're going to say RB equals get component. And we're going to use this diamond operator, which is made up of a less than and a right greater than sign with a type inside it. Okay, so we say RB equals get component rigid body 2D, and then parentheses, because this is a function that we're calling, it's a method, and so it needs to know what type to go for, and that's why we give it that. And we look at our the ball, and we see that it has a rigid body 2D component. So out of this components list in the inspector, it's going to look for that from this. Okay, and then in start, we're also going to say RB dot add force, and then it needs a vector 2 that tells it what direction and how fast to go. So I'm going to say new vector 2, and it's going to take floats, so we're going to have to specify that. So I want it to go on the y a little bit up, 0.2 f, or that's the x. I want it to go a full unit to the right, so that's +1 on the x, and a little bit up, so it's not just going on a straight line. And I think that's not going to go very fast, right? Because its total magnitude is not very much. You'd use the Pythagorean theorem to find out what exactly it is, a squared plus b squared, because we're developing a triangle out of this. So the magnitude is the square root of the x squared plus the y squared. Let's see what this does. It didn't go. Did I save it? Let's check what I'm doing wrong here. We need a force mode on this. We're going to make this so there are a couple of force modes on the rigid body. Force mode dot impulse. The alternative does it. So impulse adds it all at once, and the alternative spreads it out across frames. So if we do this, we should get quite a bit better. Get an actual result. Oh, and that tells me, we see the error is cannot convert from Unity Engine force mode to force mode 2D. So I forgot to make sure that it knows that this is a 2D force mode. There we go. And so I press play. And we get it going, and as you see, it is going very slowly. We'll let it hit that wall, and then we'll stop. But it got some force. Oh, but it didn't bounce off of that. So did we lose our bounciness here? Materials. We'll have to change that to script. So we've got a bounciness, but it just didn't have enough to do much. So the easiest way to add force to something like that, this gives us a good angle, and then we can multiply it by the force that we want. Okay. And so we come here, and we press play. There we go. So now we're rolling. And it went right through my player. That's no fun. Why? You should have picked up on this by now. We have to have a collider in here for it to recognize that it ran into anything. So I'll toss my search on the player script, come back to my physics 2D, add a box collider to it, press play. There we go. Nice. So that gets us started. In the next video, we'll work on setting it up so that when the when you start, the ball sticks with the player for a while, and so that it can lose. Right now, if it goes by, if I haven't set this thing too far off, nothing happens, and we can see, if we look at the ball, that it is still flying away. We're never getting it back. So in the next video, we'll fix those things and maybe add some randomness to our start. Thanks, everybody.